What happens when an indie author spends years teasing a world, builds a viral pre-order campaign, sells thousands of copies sight unseen, hires an entire team, only for the finished product to leave readers feeling angry and betrayed? That's exactly what happened to Audra Winter and the Age of Scorpius, and I was trying to stay out of the discourse, but I just can't help myself. I have things to say. So let's get into it.
My name is Audra Winter. I am the author of this book. It was released about a month ago, and I have lived through the worst week of my life.
Audra used her popular TikTok to make the Age of Scorpius sound like a fully realized epic. Maps, art, so much art, and often repeated the refrain that she'd been working on this story for over a decade since she was 12. And the hype worked. I have had trouble pinning down an exact number, but it seems like it's guaranteed. We know for sure that there were at least 6,000 pre-orders through the TikTok shop platform for the Age of Scorpius, resulting in 6 figures of sales, which Audra Winter has repeated ad nauseum on her platform, and a massive amount of attention. So many eyes on Audra and on her work. This is the kind of rollout that an indie author could only dream of, let alone a traditionally published author. I bet any author would be absolutely giddy to get 6,000 pre-orders. But when the books finally arrived in readers' hands, the consensus seemed to be that the content didn't match the promises Audra had made. Reviews pointed to typos, uneven editing, info dumping, excessive repetition, confusing descriptions, characters who felt underdeveloped, and so much more. For the readers who had invested time, money, and so much excitement into this world, that gap between expectations and reality felt like a betrayal. And Winter built this audience on TikTok. She's been making videos regularly for a very long time in the developmental stage of putting out the Age of Scorpius. This is how she built her audience and got so many people invested in her story to actually make those pre-orders. And since everything exploded, she's still been making content, but her tone and her response has definitely shifted in the last couple weeks. Her first response was very defensive and very dismissive of complaints and criticism, but she has since come out to say that she was feeling totally overwhelmed by the seemingly unrelenting wave of criticism that was coming her way and the deep dissatisfaction of her readers. She's since promised developmental edits, reworks, lots of effort being put into improving the product, and a re-release of the Age of Scorpius. She also promised, after a little bit of back and forth, to reduce the price of the new version, which was originally going to be more expensive than the original publication of the Age of Scorpius. And while people are cautiously optimistic about her seemingly taking criticism and wanting to get more feedback and improve the product, there's still a lot of hesitation and concern around her priorities because she seems to be returning to her focus from the first release, which is on the art more than anything else. And as people have shouted from the rooftops all over the internet, a novel is not about the art, it's about the stories and the words on a page. And as much as the art is beautiful and so many people have expressed admiration for and love of the art, it just feels like her focus is still in the wrong place for a lot of people. Now, I haven't read The Age of Scorpius in its entirety. Let me know if you would want me to do that and make a video. I will take it under advisement, but I have read a few excerpts, so I have an idea of where readers are coming from. But really what I want to talk about and what this whole debacle has me thinking of is what authors, and especially indie authors, owe their readers. What is this implicit contract between author and reader? What can we fairly and reasonably expect from the authors we support with our hard-earned money? Is this a cautionary tale about hype online running away with itself? Or is it fair warning about the risk we undertake as readers to order a debut novel, especially to pre-order a debut novel that doesn't have extensive excerpts available, and especially a debut novel from an indie author who hasn't gone through the checks and balances and the gatekeeping of traditional publishing. First, let me share a few definitions so we're all on the same page. We have 3 different types of publishing, essentially. There's traditional publishing, which involves an author going to a traditional large publisher, think the big 5, to publish their work, and in doing so, they have the full support of a large publishing house. The publishing house will take on all of the expenses for things like developing the cover, creating a marketing plan, providing a variety variety of editors to polish up a story, handling sales, and so much more behind the scenes. They take on the cost and they support the author through the process. Typically, if you're going through the traditional publishing route, you need to have an agent and you're submitting query letters along with your manuscript, and your manuscript has to stand out amongst thousands of options that are crossing the desks of these publishing employees. Your work has to be polished enough and unique enough and developed enough to really catch their eye and to feel worth it to them to invest the money in you as an author to develop your work. Then we have what's traditionally called indie publishing, not to be confused with indie authors. We'll get there. Indie publishing is independent publishers from those big five. They're usually smaller, more niche presses, and the process often works similarly to traditional publishing, and they will be taking on a lot of the risk financially. They usually provide, again, editors, book cover design, etc. Though with indie publishers, they might have fewer connections, smaller reach, and also just not quite the same budget to invest in, say, marketing. So in indie publishing, sometimes the author has to take on more of things like marketing themselves, whether they're marketing on their own social media or paying to top up the traditional marketing of their book. Then we have self-publishing, and this is where indie authors come in. Independent authors are authors who self-publish. So a self-published author and an indie author are the same thing. I know it's confusing, but self-publishing is an author taking it upon themselves to publish their book, not going through agents or publishers, taking on all of the financial risk, but also accepting all of the reward. They can go as fast as they want through production. They can hire a team or not. They can design their book cover themselves. They can pay a small artist to design their book cover. They have to shoulder all of the financial and logistical burdens of publishing a book. And while that can be much more stressful, a lot more work, and much more of a financial investment, it also usually means that if their book takes off, they get 100% of the profit, and they have full control over their finished product and the timeline to production. Now, what that means for you as a reader is probably that it's going to feel like and possibly be more of a risk as a reader to invest in, to buy a book from an indie author than it is from a traditionally published author, because you just can't know how much work this author has actually put into the development of their book. They haven't survived a slush pile. They haven't, by necessity, gone through several rounds of edits. They haven't had to be selected over thousands of other aspiring authors and over many similar stories and risen to the top. They have taken it into their own hands to publish their story, and that can mean something incredible, but it can also mean something that would never have seen the light of day if it was forced to go through the traditional publishing system. But I don't know about you. For me as a reader in the last couple years, I have noticed a narrowing of the gap between traditionally published books and indie authors self-publishing their books. Traditional publishing seems to be moving away from rigorous editing. Their standards have been lowering over the last several years, and plenty of questionably edited books get lots of traditional publishing money behind them, huge marketing pushes, and are turned into bestsellers despite seemingly a total lack of critical feedback and effort being put into developing something from a rough draft into a finished, polished product. And I've made note of this several times on my channel in reviewing books, talking about books that I felt were under-edited, some really big books with huge pushes from the marketing department of their publisher, from really popular authors, books that have come out that feel really underbaked, whether it's just a plethora of typos and grammatical errors, whether it's a severe lack of developmental editing, whether it's constant repetition of ideas and phrases and words, or maybe just a story that had potential but was never given that push and that critical feedback it needed to evolve into something truly worth a reader's time to invest in. And I'm definitely not the only person who has noticed that editing in traditional publishing seems to be slipping. That veneer of polish that used to come with a traditionally published book, that reassurance that a book being traditionally published and going through that system meant you were going to be getting something of quality, maybe not to your taste, but at least something that uses semicolons correctly. Big publisher equals quality used to be an expectation, but it seems less reliable than it used to be. quality. These books feel like they were barely edited or edited in a serious rush. And there are a bunch of reasons why this is happening. I'm going to try not to get sidetracked and go on a tangent. Basically, money. Money is the biggest reason because publishers want to make more money and they want to spend less money, always. So paying editors less, giving editors less time to edit each book so that they can churn out more books in less time, giving editors fewer resources, hiring less experienced editors who they can pay a lower wage. All of it is part of the equation. And I think a lot of us readers have noticed that the focus of publishers seems to be shifting away from quality stories to marketing and appealing to the masses. It's about the presentation of a book. It's about the visuals of the book. It's about the special editions and the pretty end papers and the sprayed edges and the tropification of every genre under the sun, rather than developing a story that has gone through years and years of development and refinement, a story that has heart and purpose and has been polished to perfection because it's about telling a story that will last, that will impact you, that will stay with you for years. We are really getting into an era of fast publishing, just like fast fashion. The priorities have shifted and it's hard to miss as a reader. And that means that your average reader's trust in traditional publishing and the quality they provide is being eroded. And for indie authors who self-publish, in some ways this is an amazing development for them because it's leveling the playing field. They can now easily match the quality of the books that are being published by the biggest publishing houses for the biggest names in the game, because the quality of those big name, big five, traditionally published, super famous authors, highly anticipated books, that quality has reduced so much that it's become very achievable for indie authors self-publishing to match that quality and to really exceed their readers' expectations. But regardless of the quality from traditional published or self-published books, anytime a reader pre-orders a book, especially a book that doesn't have many reviews or any reviews from early readers, doesn't have large excerpts available to read, especially from a debut author who doesn't have other works to compare to, you are taking a risk. It's a leap of faith. You are hoping that the story you get, the product you receive, is worth the money you paid. And it's a gamble that's not always going to pay off. You're giving that author the chance to wow you, you are putting your trust in them, but you're also taking on the risk that they won't. And in Audra Winter's case, she obviously didn't deliver the product that most of her readers were expecting. But it makes me wonder, what do authors actually owe their readers? I think every single reader would have a different answer to this question, and I would actually love to read your answers in the comments, so please let me know what you think authors owe their readers. But two things that I think probably most of us could agree on. The first one is honesty in marketing. So not overselling or misrepresenting what is actually inside the book you are marketing to an audience, being honest and upfront about the genre, the age it is intended for, the writing style, the spice level, the triggering content, the basic format, etc. Accurately representing what kind of book it is and who that book is for and how it is executed so that the right audience can find the right book for them. And the second thing I think we hopefully could all agree on is a good faith effort at a polished, finished product. And these aren't legal obligations from an author to a reader, and they're also not set in stone. They're not black and white. There is so much nuance, and different people are going to interpret what these mean differently, which is part of the problem here. But they're part of that implicit trust that exists between an author and a reader, and the trust that a reader puts into an author, especially when they pre-order a book, part of that social contract between author and reader. And some of you might be upset with me for saying this, but I truly genuinely feel this, and I feel I have to say this in the wake of all of this discussion and so many of the reactions that I've seen to Age of Scorpius and Audra Winter. No author owes you a 5-star experience. It's literally impossible for an author to guarantee that or to provide that for every reader, because every reader is different and every reader reads every book with a different set of eyes. A book can be a 5-star experience for thousands and thousands of people and still be an absolutely terrible, horrible, very bad experience for you. And vice versa. It could be panned by everyone on the planet except you, and it's your favorite book you've ever read. There's no way for an author to know that. There's no way for an author to prepare for that. And we don't want authors to try to please everyone, because the more they try to please every single reader, the less distinct and unique and experimental and special their books become. If they're trying to aim for the lowest common denominator, you're going to get the lowest common denominator kind of book. And those aren't the kinds of books that we need or deserve, in my personal humble opinion. And as someone who often feels diametrically opposed to the popular opinion on a lot of books, I just can't help but feel that popular reception of a book is not a good measure of its quality and whether the author has actually delivered on their side of that implicit contract between author and reader. Back to Audra Winter for a second. Do I think that she did things wrong? Do I think that she set herself up for failure? Do I feel that readers have a reason to feel duped, or that there was a lack of delivery on the promise? I think all those things could be argued. And I can understand why people are upset, why the people who pre-ordered the book are upset. But I do feel like people are overreacting, and I do think some people are demanding things that are unreasonable, including a refund. Because you're not owed a refund just because you didn't like a book. You're not owed a refund because a book was poorly edited or poorly written or not to your taste. If you were really concerned about the quality of the book, if you wanted to make sure it would be worth your money, you could wait for it to be released, to read reviews, to read longer excerpts, to have more of a consensus from the reading community to rely on before spending your money. Or you could even wait, depending on the book, for it to be available to read for free somewhere, or through a subscription, or through your local library. I mean, we already touched on this, but pre-ordering a book, especially a debut indie author's book, you're taking on that risk, and that means that if it doesn't pan out, you're the one who took the risk. It's not on the author. Because bookstores, online or in person, and indie self-published authors are not libraries. If you want to read for free, libraries exist. And platforms like Kindle Unlimited exist for indie authors. I think what's made people even more angry in this situation is Audra's intense focus on the business side of things, the marketing, having a team, the art, talking about the profit and the fact that she's a boss babe business lady. I think that's really rubbing people the wrong way when the product isn't what they expected. And what I find interesting is that her focus primarily on the marketing and on the visuals is what traditional publishing is doing now. Traditional publishing is much more focused on the book covers and the sprayed edges and the marketing campaigns than they are on polishing the actual story inside that cover. And I don't see traditional publishing getting the same kind of flack that someone like Audra Winter is getting when they're both doing the same thing. And it clearly works because she got 6,000 pre-orders. While I'm not an author and I've never published anything, I feel like I can kind of relate, especially to the experience of being a self-published author, because I am an independent creative. I have been on YouTube for a very long time. I make content for mass consumption on the internet by strangers I will never meet. I make content to entertain and inform and connect with other people, and I go into making my content with the best of intentions. I try to put my heart and soul into my content. I try to make content that I can stand behind. I try to make content that I feel good about, that I think people will enjoy, that I think is interesting or thoughtful or whatever it may be. And I can only do my best, and I can never appeal to everyone. I can never make content that will make everyone happy. And I am reminded of that every single day in the comments and in people's reactions to me. I am often absolutely flabbergasted by the kinds of reactions people have to things that I thought were the most innocuous thing I could have possibly said or done. And things land differently with different people because they're different people and they have different experiences and preferences and lives they've lived. And I can't possibly be what every single one of those people wants and needs. And I feel a lot of empathy for authors who are trying to do the same thing, who are putting their heart and soul into their books, putting them out into the world, and then having so many varied reactions. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with people not liking a book and giving a negative review. In fact, I think critical reviews are incredibly important, especially for fellow readers. In examples like The Age of Scorpius, the idea that people can leave critical reviews and talk honestly about their experience with the book means other people might save their money and not have the same disappointing experience. But I do feel for authors, and I do feel that expecting authors to deliver a product that will please everyone is not only impossible, but also diluting what makes art valuable in our lives. I wouldn't want my videos to appeal to every single person on the planet, because if they did, they would have no substance. I would have to say nothing of import, have no real opinion, deliver my points in the most sanitized way possible, or barely say anything at all to appeal to every single viewer. And it's the same for authors. If they were to appeal to every single reader, they would have to walk this tightrope of respectability and neutrality that is not what we need our art to do, especially now. Though really ever. Art is meant to make us feel things, make us think, make us grow and change, make us consider things we've never considered, make us better, more thoughtful, more engaged people. And even art that is just for entertainment should, in my opinion, be saying something, have a point of view, and be doing its own thing, and by its very nature, not be for everyone. What I hope authors are doing at a very bare minimum, genuinely attempting to convey a story they care about. That's it. Doesn't mean I'm gonna like the story or connect to it or recommend it to anyone. No. But if an author genuinely cares about their story and they are trying their best to convey it to the best of their ability, then I feel that they've fulfilled their side of this social contract. They are doing their best. Then even if it isn't for me, I can respect it. You know? And speaking of respect, an addendum to that is that I expect and hope authors are conveying their stories respectfully, that they are representing the groups that they are representing through their work with respect and care and thoughtfulness. And that doesn't mean that they have to represent every character or thing in one particular way, or can't write characters who are disrespectful. It just means that they themselves have done their research, are staying informed, and are treating the subjects that they are exploring in their work with respect and care. But authors don't owe us any particular writing style. They don't owe us a specific ending. And they don't even owe us writing that we feel is good, because who decides what good writing is? I have had many an experience where I have reviewed a book and talked about how terrible the writing was, and I get hundreds of comments of people disagreeing with me, telling me they thought the writing was amazing. Sometimes, no matter how cut and dry you think it is, there are people who will disagree with you. And that's just the nature of art. It is so subjective. And while there are rules in basic grammar and expectations of a story, rules are made to be broken. And who gets to decide when someone breaking a rule is subversive and experimental and innovative and masterful, and when someone breaking the rules is just a bad writer? If an author isn't invested in their story, if they don't care about the story they're telling, why should I care? I want them to be trying with everything they have, all the resources they have on hand, to make the best version of their story they can in their current circumstance. An author can meet those expectations and still make a product that I am going to rant about for far too long on camera and then post it on the internet. And that's not a reflection on the author. That is my own personal, very unique reaction to a piece of art. And that's what art is meant to do. That's what art does do. And that's not an author failing or doing something wrong. It's just being met by the wrong audience. Not every reader is going to connect with every author or every story, and that's just the way it is. But authors don't owe us stories that perfectly align with our tastes, or even quality on par with the big five if they're indie authors. Indie authors are doing what traditionally published authors are doing, with far less support and far fewer resources. As for Audra Winter, I have only read excerpts, not the entire thing. Is the writing to my taste? No. Do I think the quality is that great? From my very subjective layperson's opinion, no. Is there a clear consensus among the vast majority of her readers that they were unhappy with what was delivered? Seems to be the case. Maybe most of the people who got a copy of this book and read it are having a negative experience, and that says something. Maybe she was too focused on marketing and on the art and being a boss babe and a business lady than on telling a story to the best of her ability. But again, isn't that what traditional publishing has been doing for years? Isn't that the trend of publishing in general? Because I ask you honestly to consider the writing quality from the last few releases from authors like Colleen Hoover or Frida McFadden my nemesis. Do you truly think that the focus is on the writing quality, on polishing the story, or is the focus on releasing books as fast as possible and marketing pushes? Because what Audra's doing is what the industry is doing. Does that make it right? No, but it's interesting that she, as a debut indie author, self-publishing, is getting so much more flack than the big five with so much money and resources who are putting out, pardon my French, absolute crap time after time after time, knowing they'll rake it in because they have a built-in audience and they have that built-in trust and they have the money to do huge marketing pushes for their subpar releases. Again, not to excuse Audra Winter. Do I think that she made mistakes? Do I think her focus was in the wrong place? Sure. But again, does she deserve this kind of vitriol? Questionable. I think the people who pre-ordered Age of Scorpius are upset that they spent money on something that didn't make them happy, that didn't make their lives better, and that's fair. It's disappointing when you spend money on something and you don't like it. Audra seems to be taking the feedback on board. It's hard to know how earnestly and honestly she is going to be approaching this re-edit of her work before it's released and we get more feedback, but she seems to be trying. And what else can we really hope for from an author? But at the end of the day, authors don't owe us books we're guaranteed to love. There are no guarantees in life, and certainly not in art. Art is for everyone, but it's also incredibly subjective and an individual experience. There's no objective measures of quality. What if, for one reader, just one, the Age of Scorpius was exactly what they wanted? Exactly what they needed. They loved the characters, they loved the story, they were so sucked into it, they had an amazing time, it meant something to them, they connected to it. Does that matter? If thousands of people are disappointed, isn't connecting with readers, even a single reader, what stories are for? But this has just been me trying to express my thoughts after watching this situation unfold over the last several weeks. It's been absolutely wild as someone who was not aware of Audra Winter before the release of Age of Scorpius. Suddenly, every one of my timelines was full of her face and her book. And it's been interesting to see the conversations that have come up from it, but I've also enjoyed just letting my brain process and percolate on this idea of what authors owe us and what we can expect as readers. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you haven't already shared what you feel authors owe readers, I would love to know. I'd love to continue the conversation. This isn't me telling you how it is. This is just me sharing one perspective and trying to open the floor for discussion, because I think it's worth talking about, especially within bookish spaces, what we expect from authors and what is fair for us to expect from them. And again, that's not to say that criticism is bad or we can't have criticisms of authors or books. I think critical reviews are incredibly useful, but I do think critical reviews are for fellow readers and to help us determine what books are for us and what books aren't, for us to find those books where we can be the perfect audience, meeting the perfect product and have an amazing time. Critical reviews can be even more useful in doing that than raving reviews that don't get into details. So I'm not saying that criticism is bad. What I am saying is that we maybe have too high of expectations, and taking our criticisms directly to authors isn't always the way to go. Honestly, usually, generally, as a rule of thumb, for me personally, is never the way to go. But is there a line? Is there that point where the author has so let down their side of the implicit understood contract between author and reader that it is time to take the criticism directly to their doorstep? I don't have the answer. I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on this whole Audra Winter situation. Do you think she did her best? Do you think she handled everything okay? Where do you think she went wrong? It's a whole mess. But those are just my thoughts. I'm just one reader and I just have one perspective, so I'd love to read yours in the comments. Let's keep the discussion going. What do authors owe us, and do indie authors owe us something different or some different level of quality than traditionally published authors? I would love to know your perspective. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.